Now, when you guys were young, you were part of a farm in Pennsylvania. That's where you were raised. And was it a working farm? Tell me about life there.
Well, our parents had moved to, what they thought was rural Pennsylvania, and then it really was in 1945, I think it was, 44, 45, and they bought a farm kind of way out in the middle of nowhere, 50 miles from Philadelphia, which at the time was, quite a chore to get there.
And no electricity and
so that's where we grew up. It was about 32 acres, 40 acres. The amount I think it was 32 for most of the time we were growing up, and it was in the early years it was working because our grandfather was there and he did a lot of the work.
But
and we trailed along after.
Dermot, in fairness, would say it was barely working.
Well, we had cows,
yeah, working
pigs,
farms
sheep.
and barely
child labor, right?
Child
Yes.
labor.
Well, but
child labor were an essential part of the ingredient, especially when we were kids. But we had cows, sheep,
chickens,
pigs, a horse.
Yeah.
I don't think we had any goats.
No, it wasn't a horse. It was a
pony. Excuse me, it was a pony.
We had a
pony.
A Shetland pony.
All three of my brothers broke their arms on the pony, except me. So I was the one who was agile enough to escape.
I guess
but,
so.
But it was, broken arm on the pony.
Their whole idea was, to get away from New York City and to raise their family in a more rural area.
Now, your dad was an engineer, right?
Yeah, he was a chemical engineer who went to school at Cooper Union in New York City, and he really inspired us a lot, I think, in terms of the work ethic, anyway, let's put it that way, because his family was exceptionally poor. He lived in really a kind of a Civil War era tenement with no regular winter heat much other than gas, coin-fed gas sort of thing. And he really went to work full-time when he was 14 and went to night school from when he was 14 until his mid-40s. So he almost got a doctorate in engineering. But when our mom got sick, after she had six kids, they had 6 kids, and our mom got sick and battled breast cancer and then succumbed to that in 1962. So that sort of changed.
You guys are
our
on,
lives.
about 9 years old at that point?
8 going on 9, yeah. I think that, but it was it really was sort of a working farm, actually, in the sense that we had a giant garden, and Dermot was the main agriculturalist on the farm. So much so that when he went to college, initially his dream was to become a farmer.
No, my dream was to become an agricultural engineer and to design tractors. That was my whole,
Anyway, but he didn't know that to do that you had to learn how to count. And so since he didn't know how to count,
calculus.
This was a real problem, yeah. Well, and basic counting as well. But anyway, so he later, went into a better field where you don't have to count much, which is journalism, and I think that served him well over many years.
Yes, he's quite distinguished in that field.
He is, yeah. But I think that it was not an easy place to grow up because it was difficulties, but everybody faces those kind of things in their childhood. Different stressors that are sometimes invisible to other people. But I think that for us was really good. We had a very close. The children were all close because there were 6 children, but we were all within 5 years of age. So we essentially grew up together. And our oldest brother, Pat, who first came who's the reason why Dermot and I ended up in Alaska, really it was sort of he was kind of in charge, and basically we would do whatever he said.
So when you say 6, we have Kevin and Pat, and then you have younger sisters, Maureen and Sheila, is that right?
Yes,
right.
And Dermot and I, and then we have a younger brother who got married to my dad, married his wife much later in life, Owen, who's 25 years younger than us. So really, though there were 7 children altogether, but when we were kids, 6. And I think it was it was a challenge. I mean, what's different is that because Dermot and I are twins, we always lived in the same room You know, we lived in the same room for more than 20 years.
And
and
in
we
school, I always sat in front of him.
and I always had to sit behind
always
him.
Alphabetical order.
Alphabetical,
D
yeah.
becomes before T. Now, not in
that's 'cause I was
academic
better.
preference.
I was better, so I said.
He was a terrible student, is the problem. I was the good student, you know. I was witty
Well.
and charming.
And
Dermot was
modest.
kind of a
He's modest,
blunderbuss.
too.
Yeah.
And
So-
modest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But though the worst thing that ever happened, that
Humble.
he claims it happened to him, he claimed it was him and not me. But when President Kennedy was assassinated, I still remember this, the lady who worked with the, because we went to a Catholic school, the lady who worked in the rectory with the priest came running across the parking lot. Of course, there were no radio, you know, we didn't have, well, we had radio. And we had, there was color TV back then too, believe it or not, in a few homes, a few select homes. But nothing like that in the school, and there was no phones in the school. So anyway, she came running across, and our teacher was the Mother Superior, and she had a beet red face, you know. Beet red doesn't even do justice to it. It was, if there's something that's redder than beet red, that was it. But anyway, I'm a very heavy-set woman, and she leaned out the window, and this woman started telling her the bad news, which we later found out was President Kennedy had been shot. But anyway, I thought this was rather a humorous situation, so I started laughing. I mean, I didn't know he had been shot, and now Dermot claims he was the one who started laughing, but you know, Dermot doesn't have much
Well,
of a sense of humor,
we did
so
get
I
in
don't.
trouble.
I think
Who got blamed for it? That's what I
well,
wonder.
I got blamed for it, but he says he got blamed for it. So we have a difference of opinion on this issue. Anyway,
This
one
is-
of us
this-
started
this-
laughing.
This is how history gets twisted.
Yeah,
Robert.
and yeah, setting the record straight. But anyway, it was a very, and it was a rural town back then. It really was actually very small, but you wouldn't even know it today because 50 miles today, of course, is nothing, you know, for people to sort of commute.
Well, when the northeast extension of the Pennsylvania Turnpike was built, it came right near there, and so that
Yeah.
made it within commuting distance to where my dad worked, which was mostly in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, and we grew up near Quakertown, Pennsylvania, which, you know, where Rich Seifert is also from Quakertown, Pennsylvania,
I didn't know that.
and other noteworthy residents of people who have several people who have lived in Fairbanks over the years. Are
Yeah,
from there.
Pete Bowers is from Doylestown, I
Yeah.
think, which is nearby. So.
So, but anyway,
Escapees,
we
basically, is what you call it.
But
people
so,
who
you know,
escape
we
from
did
Pennsylvania.
end up doing a lot of chores as young people, and
Well, what's interesting is all your siblings went on to be professionals. So learning, taking that page from your dad, going to night school after a full day of
Yeah.
work and going into education, must have taken with all of the kids.
well, he really drummed it into us that this was something that was expected, that we had better get good grades in school and you know, and go to college and perform well. And
Because
I
when
mean,
we
it's
got-
just that when we had our report cards as kids, we'd have to go in one by one into his office.
We had to line up outside his office.
and show him our report card, and you know, if it was not a sterling report card, there would be
Would explain why. You know.
explain what was wrong with it. It was like going in to talk to your boss, you know, and
And if I remember,
Except you're
because
only
I
like
went to
8.
Catholic grade school too, the nuns could be sometimes a little biting in their comments.
well, we had the report cards included things like, you know, obedience and
Self-control.
self-control. We didn't do very well on
Tidiness,
these, tidiness, and so our report cards were covered with marks.
Yeah. So but
Not
then-
really the best ones on those kind
Yeah,
of categories.
yeah, those marks weren't good. So because what the nuns would do is if you were behaving badly, you'd say, well, Dermot Cole, check in self-control. But if he got out of hand, he could be 5 checks in self-control. So there was self-control inflation.
And then it was exponentially
Yeah, right.
increased,
Yeah.
like, you know, so anyway.
But our father had a great respect for education and really was,
Yeah, so
instilled
as-
in
And you
all
It's
grew
one
up
reason-
around books, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
yes. And so after his death, family started a scholarship fund in his name,
Yeah.
which still goes to a history student, I think, right, Terrence?
Yeah, yeah.
And so yeah, we've sort of continued that, and yeah, he really instilled that in us, and I think we tried to pass it on to our kids too. You know, it was it's a real source of satisfaction.
Yeah.
And you know, in our family, Brother Pat is a graduate of the University of Alaska, Terrences, of course. I was a graduate
I
eventually.
have 2 degrees from the University of Alaska, though.
And
More than
our-
any of my siblings. They only have one. And
and
I
our-
have a graduate
Did
degree.
Maureen or
and our
Sheila?
sisters Maureen and Sheila also attended.
Yeah.
Maureen got her degree in
Bachelor's degree
chemistry.
in chemistry, yeah.
And our sister Sheila was only here for a year. She did not like the cold, which is why she's in Boston today. So-
Sheila,
Before we bring you to Alaska, I just want to touch base. We touched on it lightly, but I would guess it's a traumatic thing when your mom passed away when you guys
Oh
were
yeah,
so young.
that really disrupted our lives for quite a few years.
Yeah.
well,
And in fact-
permanently.
permanently, yeah. And at that time, our dad had the mistaken notion that the best thing to do would be to never talk about her again. And that's really what happened. He didn't discuss our mom with us for 25 years, which was really kind of a mistake, I think. I don't think it was a mistake. There's no I think about it. It was a mistake. And he sort of realized that later in life as well.
Do you
but
think
yeah.
that experience brought you together, your siblings together, more tightly than might have been otherwise?
Yeah, I think so, without
Yeah.
question. And it wasn't so much that,
It was the loss was sort of marked all those years. you
yeah,
know, so.
but it's not so much that not just talking about it, but because every Sunday when we were young, we went to the cemetery every Sunday. So it's not that, it's that talking sort of about real aspects of it, that you would never get beyond the fact that you're just going to the cemetery, I think that, to me anyway, that seemed like the dilemma. But I think that it irrevocably shaped all the rest of us, because it was a very difficult time then for a man with who was a widower and had a very demanding job, and there were no, provisions for somebody with 6 young children, between the ages of 7 and 12, and 6 kids between 7 and 12, and
I
there was
can't
nobody,
imagine. Yeah.
So we had, but our grandparents were also with us on the farm, and they had other things that sort of tried to made up for it. But we did, and again, because there's so many kids, and this is not a Catholic area where we live, so we had one of the biggest families around. It's mostly a Protestant area, but it's called Quakertown. Of course, there's a Quaker settlement there originally.
Yeah.
And all of our relatives lived in New York City, so we would often see them, my dad and my mother's relatives, but particularly my mom's sister, who was a Carmelite nun, and played a giant part in our family.
helped us a lot. And she just, lived to nearly 100, and
Wow.
was a big part of our lives for all that, all the time growing up.
The best
And
thing
into
was when she
adulthood.
came, and in those days they always wore the habits, so we would go with her, and they always thought we were 6 orphans. So we could go to any store and get virtually anything we wanted because they would just give it to her. And it was terrific, So we, but the best thing was she came, and in her car she used to pretend, well, maybe she wasn't pretending. I'll ask you, Robert, you're an automotive man, you know about things. Her
They
car,
call me Click and
Right.
Clack.
click like that. Anyway, her car would automatically turn into Dairy Queen. And she said she could not stop it, but the car turned to.
I
That
think
was
it's
the only time.
neurological. It's not a mechanical
That's
issue.
right.
It's
Anyway,
a neurological.
that was the only time we ever got to go to Dairy Queen, but when she visited. But it was that part was sort of really pretty wonderful. But yeah, but I think I'll tell you, talk about education though, for a second, and what that has meant. I know for my father, it meant an escape from poverty, and I'm absolutely positively convinced that education is just about the best thing a person can do with their life in a way of improving themselves, young or old. I think the age doesn't matter, and which is why I found the university and going to school so attractive, because I thought this is really a way you can make a difference in yourself and in your community, and we knew it firsthand from our dad, because they were so incredibly poor, and he was the first one in his family to ever graduate from high school, and then the only one that ever went to college. None of the others ever did.
And
So
Terrence, one of the stories that marked him forever, it's a scar really that he bore with him. He grew up during the Depression, and he said when he was a kid, one day he went home and they found all their possessions were out on the street, and because they had been evicted from their apartment.
Yeah, I think he must have come out and say,
Well,
what's all this stuff doing on the sidewalk? I
Yeah.
think he
And-
knew what happened.
And it, so getting out of that was a sort of his lifelong drive, right? He had an incredible drive to,
Obsession.
yeah, and
You know.
you better
We could understand that, right?
better
absolutely.
perform.
Yeah.
So he had and he was
And don't be a bum.
excessive about it.
Yeah.
frankly.
Well, picking
So-
up on this theme about higher education, though, I understand it was a mugging in
Yeah.
Pat's first year in college that eventually led you to Alaska. Do I have that right?
Yeah, you do. Now, I want to tell the story correctly because he gets it wrong, and he always jumps on the punchline. But the so when Pat was in, he's a sophomore at Temple University, and anyway, he got mugged, and
which is in Philly, right? It's
in Philadelphia, yeah. And of course, the big joke was Pat was such a cheapskate. He never carried more than about 4 cents in his pocket. These muggers, it was a sparse pickings that day when they selected him. But anyway, they beat him over the head with a pipe, and he got a concussion, and all kinds of things. And then
And he was hospitalized for several
couple
days.
days, yeah.
Yeah, serious beating.
Yeah. But anyway, so afterwards he went to the library with his head aching, and that is an important part of the story that Dermot often leaves out because he's got a bleary vision and looking through the college catalogs, and they were organized by state. And first one, of course, is not Alaska, it's Alabama. And he said, oh no, that's not a good idea. And then the second one was Alaska, and that's how he ended up deciding to come to Alaska.
Well, plus it had
We didn't know how to spell Alaska.
low tuition,
Low tuition. True.
and so to him that was really important. He wanted something that was really
So being frugal.
Being
that was an
Mr.
issue.
Frugality,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah.
And then maybe not get beat up again, But anyway, that's how we ended up in Alaska in 1970. I came up with Pat. We drove up in an old pickup truck and he had a camper. It wasn't a camper, it was a shell in the back of his truck that we slept in. And Dermot couldn't come. He had rheumatic fever that year, so he actually had to stay in bed the whole summer. So I always felt kind of bad about that. I was able to go, so I came.
Was it a
came
fun
first.
trip?
Oh, it was wonderful, and it changed my life completely because I thought, oh, this is such a great place, and I want to come back here. And so by the time that when I was going to be a freshman or enter university, I really wanted to come to the University of Alaska simply because of that. So I came, it was in 1972, my sister Maureen and I actually enrolled here. And Dermot, remember being an agricultural engineer, went to Montana because he thought somehow, there was a big sky in Montana. He heard about that. He didn't know
I've
what
heard
it
about
was,
that,
but
yeah.
he heard about it. And then it took him about 2 years to flunk out of Montana. And he was banished
Wasn't
forever from
flunk
the
out.
state of Montana. He's not even allowed to go back there, I think. But anyway, that's so by 1974, all three of us were. Well, Pat was not here by then because Pat had gone on to
he
later
got a
gone
de-
to law school.
He got his degree in speech, and which is kind of
Ironic.
not odd, but a little bit in that
Well, it is very odd.
he had a speech impediment.
Yeah, that's why he majored in
And
speech.
so he went into speech
Yeah.
to sort of overcome it, and he did pretty much overcome it.
Pat had this problem that he couldn't talk slowly. I mean, Dermot and I talk like
So he-
turtles compared to him.
He would try to, So he worked on that for his whole life, but he did a lot.
He would fit 5 words into the space of 2. That's how fast he was. I'm just saying.
So but anyway, so after he got his speech degree, he went to law school at
University of Idaho.
In Idaho.
Yeah.
And
But now, can we?
Now, when
Robert,
you
can I
guys
say
though-
something though, Robert?
Yeah.
Can I finish something? So, so this is sort of back earlier, but just to say about the education when her dad, when Dermot was saying, when we had to line up outside our dad's office with our report cards, the important thing to remember is this was also associated with our allowance. And you also had to have your savings bank in hand because when we got the allowance, which was these young fellows
was a
will appreciate
copious-
this.
it was a
copious
copious.
amount of like 5 cents or maybe even 10 cents a a dime, a Roosevelt dime. I think might be the. I think it was a dime, Derm. I don't know. Sure as heck was never a quarter.
When we
Yeah.
were very young, he'd increase it by a penny a year.
Yeah, a penny. Yeah.
Did you ever go on strike for higher wages? Or
No, that wouldn't
Well,
have been a
that's
good
right, I
idea. That would have been a strike breaking. Yeah, there would have been the strike would have been broken immediately.
That's
But
right. I
No,
forgot.
wait
Yeah,
a
we were
minute. It was
young,
a penny a year. It was a penny a week.
That's right.
The penny a week increase.
Oh,
So,
okay.
So
There
we
you go.
went from like 6 cents a week to 7 cents a week.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Which is
I'm not kidding. That's how he increased it.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's a substantial improvement.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the thing is, if you're on a 6 cents a week level,
I think we were at
going
least
to 7 cents.
We were.
Were you two expected
well over a
to
dime.
pay for your own college education?
Well, we both
Mostly,
actually
yeah.
went to work about the same time.
When we were 14.
When we were 14. We worked a weekend job, so it was kind of a difficult weekend job. We sold fruit and vegetables,
The problem is they couldn't
and we
tell
worked
us
23
apart.
hours. We worked 23 hours every weekend.
Yeah, but they couldn't tell us
So-
apart. So the guy ended up calling us twin.
Yeah, so he can never tell us apart.
Worked both sides.
But the employment records, well, let's say, were non-existent.
What you
Yeah.
call under the table. This wasn't under the table.
UAF was a good deal when you guys
Yeah.
attended, right?
Well, at this so at this job, we basically were. It was sort of we saved money,
A lot of money.
several $1,000s each,
Well, I saved about $5,000 by the time I was ready to go to college, and so
because really
I
we
never
were-
spent
we
it
were-
on anything.
There was no every expectation that we had better not spend it.
Yeah.
So we didn't, and we went to the bank every week and we deposited this money. Anyways, so that whole idea of being, watching, of
Being frugal and
economical
making-
and being
yeah.
frugal, that was a big thing.
But I mean, the thing that's important to remember is that
and that money was for college. I was
Cost college, yeah.
You're going to do this.
But so we were paid $1 an hour. So at $1 an hour.
Well, that was the minimum wage at the time.
Yeah.
In the late 60s. We started in
okay.
67,
You think so?
68. Yeah.
But did it carry you through UAF when you
No.
attended?
Not the whole way,
No.
but we worked in the summer, and I worked in the summer. I worked one summer for Merrick Helicopters for Richard and Merrill Ween up at Battlefield, and worked one summer for the state of Alaska. It was my first job as a historian during the pipeline.
And
I
you
never
lived
we
in
never
your
worked on the
car,
pipeline.
right? You lived in the car?
Yeah, I lived in my car for that summer. So that
In the
cut
back
down,
of the-
I cut
That-
down on
Wait a minute, he lived in the
Yeah.
back of the
I lived
And
in
your
the back of my-
social life must have suffered somewhat.
Well, it was a 65 Falcon, which still exists. It's still around.
Still runs.
Fairbanks. It still runs. I mean, I don't own it because
Occasionally it runs.
But yeah, I took out the back seat and put in a piece of plywood, and I was just about short enough to lie sideways in the back, but it was a little bit, maybe quarter of an inch, so it was a little bit uncomfortable. But yeah, so we scrimped by, but it was still a very good deal.
Yeah, and really, sort of Pat led the way of this. And one of the biggest accomplishments that Pat had made here while he was attending the University of Alaska, he built a series of small cabins that he lived in. And most of them, he would build them, and then the ownership of the cabin would, the person.
Well, on somebody else's property.
It was on somebody else's property, and they allowed him to
Well,
build
he wasn't
it.
squatting.
It wasn't
Robert.
squatting. No, they
Now,
allowed
Robert,
him.
you may laugh, but he
or-
wasn't a completely illegal squatter.
it was-
he was legally
Well, I
squatting.
could see why he'd go to law school after this.
Well, no, I think it was
right.
6 by
Real
10.
estate
I think
division.
this cabin, the first one I went.
It wasn't
visit,
6 by 10.
It was something like
It was
that.
an 8 by 10.
Okay.
Much bigger.
It was 8 by 10.
Much bigger.
It was the Kaczynski model. Is what they
It was
call
pretty small, and it was about the size of
Yeah.
a good-sized bedroom closet, basically.
Yeah.
But
And
anyway, so he built these houses.
in the
built
shape,
a series out. And it
Derm, you can
became
point
quite
out
a-
it's in the shape of a piece of paper. Made everything very simple. Remember
Yes.
well, actually, maybe it was 8
Yeah,
by 12.
and it was just torn down a couple years ago,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
But anyway, he built a series of cabins and learned some rudimentary carpentry skills, and it really inspired my wife and I. We built a house after that. So,
Wow.
but
That's a great legacy.
yeah,
It was.
yeah,
Yeah.
because he said, and his advice was, just keep it so that all the dimensions are divisible by 4, and that way you don't waste any plywood. So. And
The
we did
rule
that.
of 4
like that.
So it was
is the rule of 4.
So it was 16
rule
by
of
24,
four.
2 stories.
Yeah. But the thing is, what's interesting about when Dermot later on went to build his house, I was helping him, and so Dermot's pretty strong, but I'm not. But so we were laying the logs, and we got really tired, and then we kind of quit. And so the bottom floor of his log house was only about
Yeah, that was a mistake.
only about
It was 6'6".
6. No, it was less than that, Derm, I think. But anyway, it wasn't very high. It was high enough for us.
Yeah, I should have put another 6 inches.
Yes.
So, because then when it came time to sell it,
A lot of people hit their head on it.
Well, they were a little too tall, a couple of guys. So,
You had to bend down to be
Well,
in the bottom
Pat,
floor.
how did Pat? Pat was pretty tall.
yes, yeah.
He was over 6 foot.
Yeah, so, well,
I don't think it
once-
was 6'6". I think it was just 6 foot.
Well, okay, once I put a suspended ceiling in it, it was not tall enough for, let's say, somebody who was over 6 foot tall.
Yeah.
Well, let's
Anyway.
get you back to UAF
Yeah,
because
yes.
I want to
Let's get
find
to the
out
point here.
because
Okay.
this is in the
Yeah.
early 70s
Yeah.
and it was a very dynamic time in the school's history.
Yeah.
Because there was many building projects. We saw the Greening Building, the Fine Arts Complex, and leadership was kind of moving around too. So, what were your memories of the early days here at UAF?
Well, I remember when Maureen and I, in our first semester in 72, Dr. Wood was still the president, and my one of my favorite professors. I really had like a handful of professors who I really admired, but I must say I think virtually every professor I had at UAF taught me something. I mean, I enjoyed every class I ever took except one, and that will go nameless. But the class was linguistics.
well, I'm glad it's named that.
That's right. I'm not sure what they call that.
Well, I think for linguistics that's appropriate.
Right. Yeah. So it was really unbearable. I thought, why is there linguistics in this world, Lord? But anyway, every other class and professor, I really got so much out of it. But one was, I took a couple of classes from Jack Burnett, and he really inspired me a lot. He was an expert on Milton, but he was such a wonderful scholar, and he was so unlike me or Dermot. When he thought of something, when he was trying to think of something to say, he'd be quiet and he'd think about what he was going to say, which is a skill I've never learned to master. But he said, he had a great observation. He said Dr. Wood was the last of the pioneer presidents. And I thought that made sense, of Bunnell first, followed by Terrace Moore, Ernest Patty, and then Dr. Wood. So from Bunnell's tenure from 1921 to Wood's retirement in 1973, in those 52 years, there were only 4 presidents. And, and half the time was just Bunnell himself. But the second longest tenure was Wood, and Wood had a major impact on the university and Alaska and everywhere, because he was a builder, and that famous, in his famous book of poems, Not from Stone.
But I want to turn more personally to your college experience, because you worked for the Polar Star, which was the name of the paper here at school, and you got eventually a degree in geography, but then became an historian because of your experiences here.
Yeah. Well,
so it really fashioned you
yeah.
for the rest of your lives.
Well, Dermot, for sure, because he was the editor of the Polar Star, did a terrific job. However, he was the world's worst manager of people. I think Dermot,
Yeah, I
you
was
agree
not
that?
a very good manager.
No, he's
That's true.
not a lot good. He was terrible. You can never get anybody to work for him because he has
now that we got that out,
he has extremely high standards, and most people don't have high standards.
Yeah, but
actually, a lot of people have high standards for others.
Look,
that's the
Terrence,
way it is.
It was a lot worse than that, and that's an oversimplification.
Well, of course
I
it
just
is.
I didn't do a very good job, and I'm better off sort of working on my own stuff. Because I feel confident in that way. I never did become a good manager, even though I did a lot of that work later on. I wasn't really good at it.
Was there a journal, or was it like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal? Was there a paper that you thought, well, that's the gold standard and we're going to achieve
Yes. Well, I sort of came into this after I sort of decided, or my D in calculus made me realize I didn't have a future in math.
Yeah, he may not have been able to count, but he knew what a D was. So maybe.
So anyway, so I drifted.
That
I mean,
variable.
I got really interested in political science and then in journalism. And this was sort of right around the Watergate era. But it wasn't really Watergate that sort of did it for me. I just became enamored of the whole idea of newspapers and their place in the world, and it just sounded like a lot of fun. And I'd read a book by Gay Talese called The Kingdom and the Power, which was a history of the New York Times, and that really inspired me a lot. And I read all sorts of biographies and books about newspapers after that, and that's how I ended up enrolling in the journalism department here.
And Dermot had a lot from Chuck Keim and Jimmy Bedford, who
Chuck
essentially
Keim,
were the journalism department.
Well, it's Chuck Keim, Jimmy Bedford, and B.G. Olson
Oh, yeah.
were the main people there who had a great influence on me. Actually, I had started there. I was a janitor. I worked overnight shift janitor in the Bennell building. And so that's kind of how I met those guys. I was working as a janitor. They would always show up early. They were always there around 6 o'clock or earlier, particularly Keim and Bedford. You know, they were, you know, they sort of gave me a lot of encouragement, and it was the one big advantage there, and that remains true today. You could have you weren't really an anonymous being to your professors if you were at all interested in your work, right, as a student, as a college student. So that did affect me. I mean, it really was a positive impact on my life.
And that smaller class size was one benefit to going to school here.
And then I went into edited the Polar Star, and I had some great help there from Debbie Damron and Joanne Cooper and lots of other people who you know, it would have been more had I been a better manager, but you know, so.
Yeah, right.
Anyway,
You chased a lot of talent away.
He did.
But I did.
Dermot's responsible for a lot of people quitting.
And you know, a lot of really good Alaska journalists had come out of the Polar Star. You know, Kim
Sturgis.
Elton and Brian Rogers and you know Ken Sturgis and
Medred.
Craig Medred and.
Yeah, that's a
You know,
distinguished.
there's a lot of
Joe.
people in those, and it was a good training ground. And you know, it took me because of that. It took me a few more years to earn a degree, but because I went to work full time when I was 23 at the Newsminder, doing sports, and then I went into politics and business. So the university helped, you know,
Well, I want to
establish me. And I had no intention of staying here. I thought after a year at the Newsminder, I'd be ready for the world,
big leagues.
The big show.
leagues.
Yeah.
But
Big
you know,
time.
I was never really ready for the big leagues. So you know, but I enjoyed it a lot, and I got a lot of it. And I learned after a fashion. I learned how to write. You know, so I'm still learning, but I got a little better over time.
Well, I want to come back to both those themes, but then I want to
But
turn
Robert,
to
can
you.
I make a point? Can I make a point to correct what he said?
I would be fooled to prevent that.
No, so I just say that it is true. One of the most important jobs Dermot ever had was when he was janitor in the Bennell building. And in those days, the janitorial department was they were university employees, you know, so he was a university employee. So, and Maureen and I, our younger sister and I, we were full-time students. Dermot was working nights, but then he was taking classes in the morning. And so we would come home from the library late at night because we were very studious. Maureen and I would drive, and we all lived together in this same cabin downtown. The three of us. Dermot lived on the
three-room
couch.
cabin.
Yeah, well, it was a real dump. But the thing is,
It was
only,
cheap.
it only cost $125 a month, so we never complained, even when like the sewer went out or we always had to fix everything ourselves. But anyway, so we would drive up to the house, and we could hear his clock radio on in the middle of the street, him sound asleep on the couch, blaring, you know, like he was at Woodstock or something.
I know. I learned how to sleep amid all the noise.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that was always important for a journalist.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but then he went off to his work, and he always said, I remember this, Dr. Hyatt, who was president, that's when he was president of the university. There was never anything on his desk, you know? Remember that term?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was clean, you know, and the sign of a clean desk is the sign of a guy who probably doesn't do anything, and I think that was
I don't
the
know.
issue.
We didn't last that long anyway, did we?
A couple of years,
well,
yeah.
Well, but I want to go back to your mentors, Bill Hunt and Klaus Nowski.
Yeah. Well,
and Bill Hunt now still a dear friend.
Bill still is alive. He's 89 years old, and you know, as of this taping, he's still alive and hale and hearty. And I see him every year. You know, we go to the opera in Santa Fe actually every year for now many years. He was the head of the history department when I was a student. Klaus Naske, who also was a UA graduate, who I learned enormously from. Both Klaus and Bill became among my dearest friends. But I had many other, though, professors too, who really inspired me. Anne Shinquin in the anthropology department. She was wonderful. As I said, Jack Burnett in the English department. Norma Bouquet was in the English department. Donald Lynch and Herbert Rashi were in geography. I really did enjoy every single class, like I said, except linguistics. You know, that was the only one. But every single one of my teachers really gave me something that which I'm internally grateful for, and that's why, like, we founded this scholarship in sort of initially when my father died, and then when my brother Pat died, we put a few more money in there, and since now we sort of named it as like our family scholarship for students, because it was invaluable what the professors gave to me. And you know, the fact is, I never had Albert Einstein as a teacher, and which was a good thing, you know, because I don't think he would have been very happy. Albert Einstein would have been happy in Fairbanks. But you don't need to be the best and the brightest in anything to be a good teacher. You just need to be interested in the students. And I've always took that as a model for me. I know I'm not the smartest guy around. You know, I'm smarter than him. But, you know, that's not a major accomplishment, right? Well, let's face it.
It's a low bar.
The two of us, the two of us set the bar really low. But the fact is that you just have to be interested and dedicated in your work.
Yeah.
And but particularly for me in the history department, I majored in geography, and I loved the world. You know, I thought, well, I want to learn about everything. And geography was a great humor to my family, because like they would say, oh, what's the capital of North Dakota?
Yeah, I think to our dad, this was like
Scrimshaw, and
one
basket
step
weaving.
above scrimshaw and basket weaving.
Yeah, which were his two favorite things that he liked to pick on.
To complain about. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to jump ahead just slightly, because eventually you went down to University of Washington, got your PhD in history there. You went to the news minor, and you really became like a tentpole for that journal. I mean, you documented life in Fairbanks for decades, and you were there when Sneddon was the publisher, and that was a really amazing age of journalism, and it's changed so much. Can you reflect a little bit, both of you, on, let's start with News Minor and Sneddon and that journalistic point, because Terrence, you wrote a biography about Sneddon statehood. So let's explore that a little bit, and then I want to talk about your time down in Seattle. But
I really, and again, it's from what I learned here at the University of Alaska that helped me find a profession that I really liked. And I don't know if journalism is a profession or not. It's a way to make a living, let's put it that way. And I love doing it. And although writing was very difficult, and it remains difficult for me, actually. I mean, it still is difficult. And I'm just sort of puttering around now, really, a little bit part-time. But I remember the first story I ever wrote took me 7 hours to write 2 or 3 paragraphs. And I just remember how painful that was. You know, and that's when we used typewriters.
It was even more painful to read.
It was so we used typewriters. You know, so it was like I don't know how many pieces
what
of paper
was that
I went
story
through.
about?
I don't remember. I have no idea. I just remember how hard it was, and I couldn't believe I figured there must be a better way.
well, there was a
of living.
certain
But I
romance
learned,
to journalism still then, because I don't know if hot type was still around, but really there was this allure about journalism and working at a paper.
yeah, well, that is always that really sort of infected me, I think, and I love the whole idea that you're able to go out, find out something, and then write about it, and people would be reading it that day or the next day. That idea always appealed to me, and I really love the history of studying the history of newspapers. So I've done that quite a bit. I've done a lot of work on that. But as time went by, I became more and more interested in just seeing what else I could find out, right? And so every day you went out to try to find out something. To me, I never fell into the idea of well, writing about the Nenana Ice Classic every year was like the same thing. In a way, it was the same thing, but you try to do it in a different manner.
Sure.
And you look at the world a little bit differently.
And that quick turnaround, I think people who don't have to write to deadline don't appreciate that is a real challenge. And to put together a coherent, compelling story in that short turnaround is quite an accomplishment and skill.
The focus is on how to do something, how to interpret and compress what you experience, and then deliver, put it into words the way I'm not doing now, which is not a coherent matter.
This is completely inarticulate.
but it's different when you're writing it, and what comes out through your fingers, right?
Yeah.
So, but I enjoyed that challenge, and it's a continual challenge. If and I'm, I don't think I ever became a really great writer by any means, and I've never written anything that was.
You have a long list of books to your credit, but I do want to ask a question about Sneddon.
And those are all, Robert. Those were all bit by bit. So you do this a little bit today, and then you do a little bit more tomorrow, and you do it in those small chunks. And that's what I can. That's something that I can do, passively.
Well, I'm going to talk about your books in a minute, but I want to ask about Sneddon, because it really seemed that his character put a stamp on as most publishers do, I imagine. But what was his influence, do you think?
Well, he was a really kind of a stern taskmaster. Let's put it that way.
Well, I've heard that.
Yes, and
what was absolutely the norm for publishers
in those days.
That's really always the mold of the publisher. The publisher owns the press. The publisher gets to say what goes in the press.
Yeah, and
it goes in the paper.
And that's because that's the business they lived in.
Yeah.
Right? That's the way they saw it. The business was, they defined the institution.
Yeah.
And it's hard to imagine a publisher not being like that from that era. Or that's the way it developed, both on the community level and the large scales.
It's the Hearst model.
Yeah. So
Citizen Kane, is the idea.
And so that created its own challenges. Of course, by the time I started in 1976, he wasn't there very often, but his presence was always there with his memos, because he was a great one for memos, long memos about people not following the dress code.
Well, I heard ties were
ties were mandatory. Hair length better be cut. And your hair length.
You're looking a little shaggy there, Dermot.
Yeah, I know, and that kind of. He was really strict with that. I mean, he once wrote a really detailed memo on what kind of cake people got when they quit. If you're there 1 year, you get a certain cake. If it's 2 years, a little bit better cake. 10 years, you get a great,
really good cake,
right? But
well, and you
so
saw
but at least by the time I was there, since he wasn't he was often in Hawaii then. He didn't, his comments about what he thought were failings in coverage were sort of indirect, and it took, and the managing editors of those times, Ken Sturgis in particular, had to deal with a lot of that, and he had to sort of insulate the reporting staff from many of the demands of the publisher.
Yeah. Let me just acknowledge both of you have received numerous awards, and teaching and your work as historian has been acknowledged widely. So, I mean, you've carved out, both of you, an impressive niche in our communities. But I want to close by talking about your books, because in some way, if I can sneak Plato into anything, I always do, being an old philosophy major, but he calls ideas children of the mind. And you have lovely families both, but you also have a lot of books behind you. And so talk to me a little bit about the process of writing now. It's different, as you point out. It's still hard for you, Dermot, but tell me about how you target your subjects and the process of putting it together.
Well, for me, it grew directly out of the academic work, because my master's thesis was a history of the founding of Fairbanks v.T. Barnett, and I thought, well, okay, I'm going to write this as a book. And I never completely told everybody at the university that was my plan, because I thought, well, maybe they think it wasn't serious enough. So, but I got it published, and it's been in print now for almost 40 years, which is as for the last 30 years, as crooked past, the history of Fairbanks.
And it's really it was really the first really decent history of Fairbanks.
Wow.
Really.
I don't know about that, but it was
in a book.
It's
in a
quite
book
respected.
in book
Yeah.
form. I mean, there were
Yeah.
some good articles before that, but
Yeah.
not too much in the way of a book specifically focused on the
founding
of
Fairbanks, so
it,
E.T.
yes.
Barnett, and he was just it was just a wonderful experience. But then I went to graduate school to get my PhD. I was working at the same time for the publishing company. While I was at the University of Washington, I was also working for Alaska Northwest Publishing Company, with Bob Henning, and they wanted to do a book on Nome. And I thought, well, okay, I can do a dissertation on Nome, but I never told the publishing company I was doing my dissertation on Nome, and I never told the university I was also writing a book on Nome, because I knew if either of them knew the other, it would be like Star Trek. It would be Mantor and Antimantor coming together, because both would think, well, the university would say, well, it's not serious enough, and the publisher would say, well, it's too serious. So that would be the problem. So I never let the twain meet there.
When worlds collide.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So because I had my own vision of what I thought you should write for an educated, intelligent audience that can be as widely read as possible, and I hate academic jargon and people who write down to people, and I think it's an academic disease, actually, of academics thinking that they have this special language that only they know. Mm-hmm. And it's everything, as far as I'm concerned, that's worst about academic life in that way, when you think you're above everyone. And I don't know, I thought, well, I couldn't ever feel like that, because I went to the University of Alaska, and by God, one of the great things about the University of Alaska is that a quote in the book on the history of the university said, the students at the University of Alaska were not the 9 out of 10 people you meet on the street. They were mostly number 10. Now, that didn't mean that they were the top. That could also be number 10, could be the bottom, too.
Well, we're not looking at it that way. They were just, a lot of them were
following their own thing.
Unusual and not necessarily
traditional.
stereotypical, people, right? I mean, they had a lot of ideas of their own.
Yeah,
I think.
And I'll tell you, that really has been one of the hallmarks of the University of Alaska, because every student at the University of Alaska is non-traditional, virtually. Even the traditional students are non-traditional.
Right.
So I think it's a thing that's given me great joy, because when I've spoken at other universities, in some ways, now, some universities have maybe a higher quality of students than we do. I will say that. But they're not as interesting as ours. Yeah. And we have some of the best students in the world and some of the worst students in the world. And actually both benefit from that kind of mixture. In a lot of other universities, you don't have the level of diversity that we have. And we really do have this incredibly diverse student body and faculty, and which is what made it so enjoyable. So, but those are my books are on serious topics with lots of footnotes. Dermot, on the other hand, he doesn't use footnotes, right, Dermot?
I've used footnotes.
Yeah, how many footnotes were in the one on Bank of Alaska?
It's true. I did write a book with 1,000 footnotes. Now, the thing is, that might have been, in retrospect, a mistake. Might have overdone it just a wee bit.
Like 900 would have been enough.
It's true.
Well, here's what I want to know about you two. Is it true
Robert,
that Terrence gave you the idea for Frank Barr, your book?
Yeah, actually, that's how Frank Barr came about, because
that was your first book, right?
Yes, and that, and I really my goal was, okay, I'd rather do something that maybe is a little more permanent than the newspaper that gets discarded the next day. So
the next morning,
or the next or even that day. Let's say, or even 15 minutes after you've read it. So But the Frank Barr book came about because Frank Barr, who was a bush pilot in Alaska, had been friends with Bob Henning, or an acquaintance with Bob Henning, when he was buying furs out in McGrath.
A fur buyer, yeah.
A fur buyer, yeah. And the late Archie Satterfield, who was a prominent newspaper guy in the Northwest,
Seattle PI,
had started writing a book on Frank, and I'd written a couple of chapters and couldn't go on with it, so they were looking for somebody else to do it. So Terrence's idea was that I would do it, so he got me involved in it. But one of the things I thought was funny about that was in the chapters that Archie had done, at some point, Bob Henning had concluded that it should be an autobiography instead of a biography. So what Archie did was he crossed out all the he's and made them, he changed everything, he changed
First
the pronouns.
person.
Yeah,
I.
He changed it to I.
Which is a good thing to know. That's the difference.
That's the
between
difference between biography and
autobiography. If it's a he, it's a biography. So if it's an I, autobiography.
Your experience shows through on that.
Yes, well, anyway, so I took what Archie had done and labored mightily on that for 2 or 3 years.
Because it's harder, actually, to take something like that and rework it
Yes, and
than to fashion it yourself.
Yeah, so I took what he did and worked with Frank, and
He went down to Medford, Oregon, where he was living, right?
he was in Grants Pass.
Grants Pass, okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
and that was good, and it was one of the worst, scariest moments of my life. Frank probably at that point should not have been driving. He was in his 80s, and so he took me out to dinner at some all-you-can-eat buffet place, and while we were pulling up to a stoplight, he's slowing down and whatnot, but he turns around, looked at me, and he takes his foot off the gas, and he doesn't have it on the brake, and we ran into the car in front of him. Luckily, he wasn't going very fast, so these guys come back, and I thought they wanted to kill him. But he said, "Oh, okay, I'm sorry," and anyway, but we got over that. But Frank was a great guy, and a very colorful storyteller.
Remember that title.
And the title, it's Frank Barr, bush pilot in Alaska and the Yukon.
No, but that's not the title he wanted. He wanted was always flying was better than working,
Flying is better
which
than
is what
working.
every pilot wants to call their autobiography. Flying is better than working.
Yeah,
right?
but he could have called it, if you want to get there in the worst way, fly with Barr.
That was his slogan.
That was his slogan. Yeah. And so he, but that's a really slim volume. I wouldn't even call it a book.
More of a booklet.
It's a booklet. But I spent a lot of time on that.
Yes.
I spent I spent thousands of hours working over that.
Yeah.
And I worked on it on my days off and at nights.
But see, I had to help Dermot with that a little bit because he was used to writing sentences paragraphs that were only like 4 words long, which is in the newspaper business. You can have a
column
paragraph
inches.
that's 4 words long. Yeah.
so
he had to make his
it
paragraphs a
longer.
little longer.
Yeah, and so Terrence helped me edit that. And my second book was a history of the 1908 auto race from New York to Paris, which has nothing to do, has a little to do with Alaska because they were going to drive through Alaska. But anyway, he gave me that idea, and
Who did?
You did.
Oh, who was that?
You did. You gave me the idea.
Oh,
This is a joke. But anyway, the New York Times had sponsored this and co-sponsored it, so it was
The race.
incredible.
The race, not the
incredible
book, but the race. Yeah.
it's a wonderful book.
Yeah.
Well, it's a book. Let's go.
Oh, it's a
I'll
good
agree
book.
with it.
Yeah, it's great.
And,
It's still in print, isn't it?
Oh no, it's not in print.
Oh,
It ought to be in print.
it ought to be in print. Okay.
It's not. But after that, then I did. I've done a.
What happened was
a handful.
the Moonies ended up buying the publishing.
That's true.
It was a New York publishing house that the Moonies bought.
Yeah.
So it's probably in print in South Korea somewhere.
Well, but after that, I did maybe half dozen or more books about Alaska.
Yeah.
So, and some of these originated with some of them were my idea, and others were people had come to me. Ken Sturgis at Epicenter Press had came to me and wanted a book on the pipeline, and so that really was my most successful book. I did a social history of the pipeline.
What's the
Well,
title
I
of that
wrote
one?
It's
a,
called
a
Amazing
book of the
Pipeline.
city on Fairbanks.
And I did history of
yeah,
Fairbanks.
Right.
Yeah, and a history of the first 50 years of statehood. And anyway, all of those have been fun, and I worked that in around my newspaper career.
So that work ethic that your
Oh,
dad instilled on you really still.
Yeah, well,
thing is,
depending on the ages of the kids at home, my working schedule was this. I either would, for one or two of the books, I got up at 5 a.m. every morning and work for a couple of hours, and then on the book at home, and then go to work. And then as the kids got a little older, I shifted that, and I ended up working from 10 or 11 at night to 1 on the book, and then get up the next morning doing newspaper work. And boy, that's something. After when I was done with that, it did seem tiring.
You think?
And so I thought, well, I'm not really sure I want to do this anymore.
Well,
so
let's fast-
because the job can be
And
it's
the
a
books were
full-time
highly
job.
lucrative, right?
They were not highly lucrative.
I don't think either of us have ever made any money off of any of our books.
Wait till the film rights come out.
Right. yeah.
No, my pipeline book is still.
What's the name
print.
of that pipeline book
It's
again? though?
Amazing Pipeline Stories.
Did you get that, Robert? It's
Yeah. Okay.
amazing
He did-
pipeline stories.
And it's not a great title, I agree.
All right.
But it's still.
Wait,
but,
can I
but
get a
it
word
is-
edgewise?
I tell you what, it is fulfilling. It's kind of emotionally and intellectually fulfilling to do something like that and to produce sort of a finished product. Really,
Yeah.
and that's kind of how I looked at it.
Yeah.
I still do.
Yeah.
It was a worthwhile. Those were worthwhile experiences.
Yeah. No, and I think the thing is that I really want to say what's great about Dermot is that very few journalists write with the sustained quality that he has over these years. Very few. And very, even select fewer can produce books at the same time that he did this. Now, the long-suffering partner in this is his wife, Debbie Carter, who had to put up with him being Mr. Grumpot while he was doing all these books. But because it's a really difficult and challenging assignment. But the thing is, it's true, Dermot has written more words about Fairbanks, Alaska than any human being in history, and than any human being in history ever will, because they'll never be the same kind of thing as a daily newspaper columnist like he was for almost 40 years.
Okay, but then the next question is, okay, who cares? That's the next.
no,
that's the
no,
next
I care.
I'm
question.
going to actually bring it forward. I just want to close by asking this
Okay.
question. I had a big, profound question for you.
All right, go
but
ahead.
watching you two interact, is this how you are at like Thanksgiving dinner, where
Oh,
you're
yeah.
kibitzing over history, and is that?
Yes.
And do you
I
have
never
any?
get a word in edgewise. I mean, and I got to ask you, Robert, who of us is the more witty conversationalist? Wait, is it him or is it
Oh, I
me?
am not touching that one.
All right.
But finally, do you either have any projects you're working on now that?
Well, I have some things that I want to do.
Like to finish his woodshed, but he got it finished.
No, I did finish my woodshed.
Yeah.
So I can take myself out behind it and, whatever. No, but I do have a couple writing projects, which I haven't committed to, and but I'm kind of thinking that, I'm kind of torn between, something that's really ephemeral and maybe see if this is something I can do more of a lasting writing project. So yes, but I don't really want to say what it is. So.
How about you, Terrence? I know you're
Well,
addressing health concerns.
I'm
but-
working. Yeah, I do have. I've got stage 4 gastric cancer, and which is a fatal disease, and I can't be cured. I can't have. The only cure for this disease is a gastrectomy, and at stage 4 you can't have that. So far, I'm still the only ill effects I have actually are from chemotherapy, not from. But I've had around 30 treatments for chemotherapy. And I'm still do quite well. So that sometimes is a little bit of a challenge, but I can't complain at all because I don't even feel that's keeping the cancer under control so far. But I do have a couple of books that I'd be interested in, and I was supposed to get done, and hopefully, if I can't get it done, that Dermot will finish it.
He started one of them more than 30 years ago.
Yeah, well, I have lots of projects.
We know
one
about
is
those
an update.
deadlines.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Actually, he had a contract for this one more than 30
That's
years
true.
ago.
I did. Yeah, the only book I ever got an advance for, I never wrote.
But you did have to do some other work to pay it off, I remember.
That's right. I mean, for this book, I got an advance, and I had to write the introduction to one of his books to take care of the debt. Which
You had to say some good things.
I
in it, so,
worked
yeah.
in though a good line in that book though, because the Bernard and Marvin Kalb one time wrote a book together, I think on Henry Kissinger, and they used the click and clack line. Don't drive like my brother, except it says, needless to say, all the mistakes in this book are my brother's. So that's what I was able to use that in this book. But I will say that we hope, and I hope this part of the interview gets included in the show, but that if I don't live to finish this new version of the history of the university, that Dermot finishes it, because he could finish it really, because I was supposed to do an updated version for the university centennial, but I couldn't figure out what year was the centennial because there were too many years.
Yeah, well, that's not a good
Okay, that's
excuse.
not the right reason,
That's
but
not
anyway.
the accurate reason.
That's not the
either.
accurate reason. That was what you call a
missed the
joke.
deadline.
But
you
it's
know,
a
right?
good story.
It is.
It's a good line.
It was a
Correct.
joke.
Okay, you're right.
It was a joke.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's called creative nonfiction. Sorry, I forgot the term there for a second. So, but anyway, I really do think that the role that the university has played in both of our lives has been irreplaceable. I mean, there's nothing like it. This place means so much to both of us, and I really hope that anything that we can do that helps its survival into the future for others who come after us and our.
Well, you both have made such a huge impact on the state and the Fairbanks and university community. Terrence and Dermot Cole, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Robert, thank you. It was
Thank
great.
you, Robert. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So we have some questions.
Robert, can I say something first?
Oh, no.
I just want to say, when we saw this thing, it said, God, this movie is going to be an hour and 48 seconds long. And I thought, well, maybe it could be half as long, just have the parts about one of us. I thought that would have been enough. Instead, you had to subject all these poor people to, or it could have been 48 seconds long. I mean, how did it end up 1 hour and 48 seconds?
Well, because we kept talking a lot. That's. but first, I want to apologize. If those of you who looked closely at the video will notice that I am wearing my shirt.
But it's a different jacket.
It's a different jacket, different shoes. All right, go ahead, Robert.
Well, one of the first questions we got you answered in here, but maybe this is your chance, Dermot, for a rebuttal. Can you both finally clarify which one of you is smarter?
I think that topic has been dealt with thoroughly.
Well, okay, here's one from you, from a Terrence C. Why is Dermot always interrupting Terrence? Okay.
Darn good question. he was worried there wouldn't be any questions, so he wrote out his own question. He did.
Well, here's to both of you.
Okay.
And it's
Well, wait, what can I point out? Didn't he talk a lot more in that movie than me?
You know, I think it was 48 seconds longer.
But I think it could have been the interviewers. You know, I'm not going to blame it on you, Roberto,
Well,
but I'm
thank
just saying.
you.
All right.
Here's a good round robin, I think. What do you love most about Alaska?
Pass.
A question like that's kind of impossible to answer right off the top of your head. That's something I'd have to think about. But mainly, I would say that I've had the chance with my wife, Debbie, and I, to raise our family here. That's what I've loved about Alaska. I mean, and that's more important than anything else. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. God, that's really a tough question. I mean, I've been really lucky, and my children are here. And Dermot, are any of your kids here? I don't think his kids showed up. That's all right. Did they?
No, they're not here.
But I'm not saying that reflects on
there's
the
reason.
quality of the parenting. But anyway, my children are here, and I think that. But it's kind of lovely because the way of course, our kids are all half brothers and sisters, you know, and they're some of them are really interesting and wonderful.
Well, genetically.
Well, genetically, yeah. Well, got to explain everything to this guy.
Because
All
they're
right.
identical twins. Right?
Yeah.
All right, next question.
You know, I could just hand these over. We'd lose 48 seconds right there, I'm sure. Do either of you have subjects you wish someone else would research and write about?
Yes.
Care to amplify on that?
Oh, I just think there's immense room for analyzing the policy questions and the environmental questions and everything that lies before us in Alaska.
Yeah.
It needs to be researched and analyzed, and it's just, there's just immense opportunities for people to pursue research that adds to, our knowledge, and that's both in the social sciences and in the hard sciences. So.
And I think that one of the reasons we're in this catastrophe right now is that ignorance in Alaska, and it's among leaders, it's among the people, it's among the citizens. We're all responsible in part for this because we haven't done a good job of educating our people. We haven't done a good job. I mean, we have a governor who is completely ignorant about Alaska, and in every way, and too many politicians who have been willing for years not to take any responsibilities of citizenship, and that's not a new problem, and we're all culpable of it, and it's a 40-year-old problem. But I think that there's so many projects. It would be wonderful for people to see, and one is just thinking about all the many complications that face young people in Alaska today. We have a lot of really difficult things and a lot of wonderful opportunity too. But gosh, that's why the university is so important, and why I'm so proud of the Newsbinder's editorial today. And I brought this along, and I think
I might say something about that the idea of front page editorials, Sneddon was always big on front page editorials going back to the 50s. Now, I don't know if before that there was much, if Cap Lathrop ever did. I don't think he did.
Lathrop did it once in a while, Durham. Yeah,
but,
yeah, he did.
But this was really particularly well done, I think, and timely, and really deals with the importance of this moment. It's very important.
Well, the Newsbinder's 116 years old this year, and this is the first time in its history there's been a one-page. The editorial's been the entire front page, and it's that much of a crisis because essentially, if this is not overridden, not only will the sick and the poor and children who, for no fault of their own, I would sometimes tell my students this, and I saw Paul Reichert there in the audience. I didn't say this when I was going up for post-tenure review, but I would tell my students, somewhat jokingly, some of you had crappy parents, and they did. Some of them had really bad parents, and doggone it, that's what we have to do in education, is help people make up for stuff, some of it as no fault of their own. And in our social services, and it's not the fault of little children that their adults in their lives have let them down. So what the heck, we're doing this, and then if we just look at just the university in particular, this will cut the university in half. This is essentially ending it as a statewide institution. It's just unbelievably short-sighted, and so that's what I hope that there's a future for. That, I hate to say it, I'm sure Mississippi is a fine place, but I don't think Alaska deserves to be number 50 in everything, and that's where they're driving us to that's where they're going. We're going that way, and I don't know if Dermot wants to say anything about it.
No, I don't have any political views.
Well, some have branded you the anti-Koch brothers, so...
I agree. I pretty much agree.
Well, let me say about this. Neither Dermot nor I are billionaires. I'm just saying, right there. Koch brothers have their billions.
And I think
I got billions of ideas.
Dermot's too modest, but Reporting from Alaska is his blog, and he has a great many articles that have documented certain facts about the election and the post-election promises of the administration. So
And Robert, let me say the one thing, and I got this idea from Dermot, but It's absolutely in the Anchorage Daily News today. The lieutenant governor has another headline from another piece, churned out by the government. Lieutenant governor didn't write this. People on government staff wrote this, saying that Mike Dunleavy has kept his promises, and that's a complete lie. Mike Dunleavy lied to become governor, and no one in the administration is willing to admit that he lied. He did not. And Dermot has brought this up repeatedly. He did not campaign on what he has done. And it is an absolute, complete falsehood. And must say, the reporting on this generally has been terrible because the newspapers in Alaska are a shadow of what they once were because the finances have disappeared. So I would just say that anytime you see that anybody say, well, he's doing what he promised, that's not true. That is absolute lie. And people can say, oh, well, you knew where he was coming from. People didn't know where he was coming from. This really is he lied, and that's why Alaskan should override. That's my Johnny Cochran little saying, but that's it. That's it. He was not truthful, just not. So, okay.
Well, as you can imagine, current events occupy many of these questions. Some of them you've addressed. I'm going to go, when we wrap up here, on the future, because many people ask you to kind of look ahead and see what you think's going to happen down the line. But this person writes, with a $3,000 dividend, a significant amount of that goes straight to the federal government through taxes. How do we make this clear to those who need their PFD no matter what? The amount going to the feds is about the same as money saved by vetoes. Do you want to broadly address this issue of PFDs?
It's part of the overall level of education that needs to take place. And that is, you haven't seen any real widespread, if any, news coverage on that particular item. That what percent of the $3,000 dividend goes to federal taxes right away. I imagine it would be something, it's probably not 15%. I'm not sure what it would be overall, anyway, because kids are receiving it. But this is part of the issue. Why isn't that well known? Why isn't that part of the discussion? And there's both a political failing and a failing in terms of the news media. Now, the news media in Alaska is really far reduced from what it once was. I mean, there are far fewer people doing that work. The government has a lot of people putting out information, but there's really not much in the way of independent analysis. And that's just one of many, I don't really have the stats right off the top of my head on that, but that's something that should be analyzed so that people understand it and that it's part of the give and take. Yeah. Because it certainly would lead people to change their minds somewhat. Would you rather have this dollar go to federal taxes or, somewhat, probably less than $1 go to,
the local school.
Yeah, to keep supporting local services.
But I'll say one thing, and
anyway,
Dermot mentioned this the other day, but he's written this story about 400 times, no, maybe only 40 times, but that when the PFD announcement, and I don't know if it was Hammond started it, making a big deal about what the size of the dividend is, and that should have never started, because this idea that somehow the dividend is the key number has always been misinformation on the part of the government. And it probably goes back to Hammond's administration. I don't know who first did it, but that's not the key number. The key number is the size of the permanent fund. The dividend was only designed, as Hammond said, and I did a long interview with him before his death, and he was, as always, chagrined that he did not veto the income tax repeal in 1980. Now, Dermot points out it would have been passed because it passed the legislature by a vote of 58-1, and it would have been, of course, overridden. But nevertheless, that was the key mistake. That was the key mistake right there, as far as I'm concerned.
And in the current situation, we don't have a balanced fiscal plan of any sort. And so in that situation, you have a lot of room for demagoguery and pandering. And that's kind of what we have, I think. And,
but in some ways, this pandering goes back to the beginning of the dividend program. And
Yes, and it was one thing when the state had enough money coming in that it could safely ignore the real question
right,
here.
yeah,
You know?
yeah. But the dividend should always been the other side of the coin of the tax, and that's how it was intended.
And that was Hammond's core belief, that you needed taxes. And, you know, there's a contradiction in that in him, in his so-called philosophy on it. So.
Well, some person observes that this event coincides with the first day of the special session, but they wonder, will lawmakers ever end up in the same venue, since 21 are in Wasilla and the remainder in Juneau? Has there ever been this kind of situation where it's so deeply divided?
Some people have told me that the pressure is building, that more of them will show up in Juneau. I don't know. This is an unbelievable mess.
The only historical analogy, I think, is the 1947 territorial legislature, which essentially bankrupted the territory of Alaska. And that was the year that the University of Alaska actually survived on private donations, including $25,000 from Cap Lathrop, $10,000 or $15,000 from Alaska Airlines. Andrew Nerlin gave some money. It was terrible. That legislature led ultimately to the 1949 legislature, which passed the income tax, because basically the territory went broke, and everything would have totally collapsed if they had not installed the income tax in 1949. I think that this situation now, I was talking to Karen Perdue before we came in. I understand why the average people don't understand about the PFD, and they don't understand about Alaska history, and people who live in one region often don't understand another region. But the legislators are a different matter. And the thing is, there may be some legislators, okay, there probably are some that are so stupid that they really don't know the truth about the complexity of our situation. But most of them actually do, if they've had to sit in those meetings, if they're not so ideologically blinded. That's what I think is sad, is that we're not really talking about ideas and information. This is all ideology. And in this particular odd case, it's driven by the Koch brothers, by, as Dermot calls her, the temporary budget director, Donna Arduin, or how you ever say her name. And she's not going to be here probably next year. She's going to be gone. And we're going to be saddled with this catastrophe if on Friday 45 people don't stand up to do the right thing. Or Wednesday. Well, Wednesday's the first veto, Dermot, right? Can't they, if they fail, I don't know.
No, they're addressing the veto. They're taking testimony and whatnot tomorrow, and I think they're setting up for a vote right on Wednesday.
Session to consider overrides on Wednesday. Yeah. And it's not clear that there'll be
a quorum or enough people.
Well, it'll be a quorum, but it's a 3/4 majority that's required, and it's not clear. So it's not. We really don't know what's going to happen. It's a bad situation for the state. That's all.
It's a terrible. So I think it's not a bad situation. It's disastrous.
Okay, we could harangue this more. I think we should move on.
I think there's a certain irony, though, that Alaskans traditionally don't want to see outside influence, right? Remember the fish wheel and fish processors being one of the motivating factors for statehood. But ironically, so many outsiders are driving the budget today in this administration. Isn't there an inherent sort of conflict going on there?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, there is, and we're our political system is really out of balance here. Yeah. It's really this is not sensible. This is not a coherent way to govern.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is, it's partly the era, and obviously the Trump disaster is a similar thing to the Dunleavy disaster, except this is more local to us. But it's a microcosm of it, because the press has disappeared. Now, I sent this to Dermot the other day. There was a story that the AP ran on some of the tax things. I sent him this one line. You could not understand that line at all, this paragraph. You couldn't understand. It was absolutely unintelligible. So the report, and the reporters have a tough job, but there's so few of them. There's so much to cover. And basically what we're hearing is propaganda from the government. And it's so ironic, because so many of these people now in the administration claim to be anti-government. And it's the most government-dominated propaganda machine there's nothing to counter it, I guess. Maybe we should stop talking about this because it's depressing. I hope everybody, though, in fact, calls their legislator and sends them a note and begs them to override Mike Dunleavy's foolishness. And the shame on that SOB, as far as I'm concerned. He's a graduate of the University of Alaska. He's a graduate of the University of Alaska. And, well, Derm, I would tell him if to his face right now. This makes me mad.
Well, someone.
He's a graduate. Now,
I'm just saying,
I'm not sure. I know he's one of the favorite students of my colleague, Dr. John Heaton, in the history department. Wasn't he? Oh, no, he wasn't. Never mind. That was just a joke.
when you're a
It was
professor,
a joke.
when you're a professor, you learn how
Dermot
to.
has no sense of
give
humor. I hope you
endless
realize
answers.
that.
All right. Well,
I have 4 questions that ask about the future based on your background.
I got a joke about
but
that.
But first,
Wait, can I?
You know,
can I-
one of the
Robert,
things
can I get a
that-
word in here, Robert? Jeez. Okay.
yeah, I just want to observe that in some ways you complement both each other. How often do you talk to one another, and are you still so influential in each other's pursuits and concerns and whatnot?
well, I think Terrence is always an expert on what I should be doing.
Exactly. I am. I mean,
Now, is there? So that's
I can honestly say if someone said something or there was a
He'll
piece.
know how I will react.
I do know that.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah. I do. I can do it
okay.
almost with 100% accuracy on insubstantial things. But Robert, can I say something? The old joke about historians predicting the future. I mean, they can't predict the past. What are you asking them to predict the future for? Anyway, okay, that's the joke.
Well, I think a number of people are concerned about the future of the state. There are 4 questions here that are versions of the same question. You came up here, you built a life for yourselves here at the university in Fairbanks. Do you think that's possible going forward? Why would any family want to stay here? What do you think about Alaska's future? And should anyone stay in Fairbanks? All 4 with that same.
Well, aren't those sobering questions? I'm not going to give a flip answer to that because.
Can I give one?
Yeah, he will.
It's a joke.
And this is it's hard for me to put this in a positive light, right? So what's happening? And I know the University Board of Regents will strive to make the best they can with whatever happens here, but we're not on a really good, this is not the right way to approach our future, especially a future that's going to be more complicated and requiring more education and more training for young people. So it's really shortchanging young people.
Yeah, really.
So and that's just give lip service to that. Here, I mean, why? I have a piece I just wrote this afternoon, and in which the budget director is talking about, acting on behalf of the governor, speaking earlier this year, again and again and again, saying we need community colleges for real Alaska jobs. Now that's one way of looking at it, but that acts
does that mean?
as if I don't know what it means. And secondly, higher education is essential, I think, right? And not everybody's going to get the 12-week, $75,000 a year computer coding jobs, which don't exist. And so there's a real, anyway, I can't answer that in a positive way. This is a bad time for the university and for the state, in my view.
But I think, look, I mean, the university will survive in some form. We know this. But there's all kinds of levels and gradations. And the thing is, everybody has some gripe about the university. Everybody does, parking, an administrator, the teacher they didn't like, You know, the history class that
didn't show up.
the history professor was a wee bit late.
The linguistics,
Right.
shall we?
Linguistics department, exactly. But, you know, there's things to complain about in the Alaska State Senate too. You know, like there was senators who sat there and didn't do anything for 8 years, and so we haven't gotten rid of or cut the Alaska State Senate in half. So the idea that you would take this anecdotal evidence is just bigotry on the part of too many of our leaders, and it is a lack of education. And in that sense, as the university, we haven't done a good job. We've failed.
But look, and part of this is our political system is rather, we don't have a very deep bench, let's say, right? In our political system, we just don't. And
do you have any insights why that might be? I mean, so one person wanted to know, how do you explain Governor Dunleavy? So,
well, let's look at the legislature. Legislature pays $50-some thousand a year, right? It's in essence a full-time job. There's great public sentiment to pay legislators as little as possible. Now, I happen to think they should be paid more, and that might entice people of a higher caliber to run for office. And they don't, because if you have something going on, you're not going to quit your good job and run for the legislature and, you know, be virtually not unemployed, but, you know, underemployed.
Unless you work for the oil company, ConocoPhillips. And in fact, that's part of your job, is being in the legislature. I mean, that's one of our difficulties. Frankly, I think one of the great...
But that's only available to you know, 3 or 4 legislators.
Yeah, right, I know. But I think, Robert, one of the great tragedies in modern Alaska, when Sarah Palin ran or was picked by John McCain to be vice president, that effectively short-circuited any discussion of real reform in the legislature from the VECO and Corrupt Bastards Club. And nothing happened. It was basically like it never happened. And now we have a situation where Mike Dunleavy has hired, you know, Ted's son, Ben Stevens, is actually back in the administration. And that's a shameful thing. I used to say how Alaska was quite fortunate in the lack of corruption. Of course, there was the Sheffield impeachment and some other issues, but compared to many other states, we were very fortunate. This is a terrible situation that we still have with the dominance of the oil companies in Juneau, and the fact that we don't have a sensible revenue policy. I'll just say this one thing. I used to joke. I said this, and I got Neil Davis really mad at me. But partly it was to poke at the Democrats too. You know, maybe we should tax the oil companies too much because we don't tax anything else. So I can see if you're an oil company, you don't tax anything. We don't tax gold, and we don't tax our minerals.
But it's a small amount.
Well, hardly anything.
Small, yeah.
Well, good observation, Derm. But it's functionally zero.
Yeah.
It's a functionally zero. It's like during territorial days where they said, Mildred Herman, who was of the Constitutional Convention, said, in those days, the revenue ran by how much people drank and how the red salmon ran. That's what the revenues, because by 1947, guess what? The salmon was so bad, Alaska made more money from selling license plates than they did off the salmon tax. That's how bad the situation got when the salmon industry collapsed. So we're almost in that situation now. We have these piddling little fees like for your driver's license and other stuff, but we have no taxation of almost anything else other than oil. And Greening used to say Alaska was a one-crop country like cotton was in the South, salmon was here, and it's the oil problem that we have now. But it's a really complicated situation. But Dunleavy in particular, this is quite so cynical and well-funded. Dermot was the only person who reported it. Mike Dunleavy's brother paid for his whole campaign. And it's a Koch brothers.
He didn't pay for his full campaign.
Okay, not the whole campaign.
He paid for a large part of it.
Or most of the campaign. A majority of it. Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Hundreds, yes.
Yeah.
Isn't it, right?
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
His unofficial campaign.
It's an unofficial campaign. It wasn't the actual real campaign.
It was the unofficial.
The unofficial campaign, which looked identical, almost like they were twins, to the real campaign. somehow it was completely legal, you know?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any other
I-
questions
no,
there that are more
I thought there was
interesting
going to be
than
I thought there was going to be a question asking for my prediction of the next
Okay.
couple of days.
Oh,
Is there a prediction like that?
There's one here that's asking, Dermot, what do you predict?
prediction about what?
No, my prediction is that it'll be smoky for the next couple of days. All right, I was working on. I had that joke practiced. I was working on it.
That's the best you could do?
Yeah, that is.
Jeez. Wow.
Well, I want to thank you both for.
Well, wait, Robert, I didn't get to talk. No, I want to apologize for you guys having to watch an hour, mostly Dermot
No,
talking.
an hour and 48 seconds.
Oh, excuse me, hour and 48 seconds. Well, is there anything else that we should say, or should we just go out and have ice cream?
No, I think the ice cream is beckoning here, so it's.
And also, there's UA Press and that wonderful fest schrift.
Can I say one thing, though, seriously?
Can you?
yeah,
Can
I know.
I stop you from
No.
saying that?
May I? He says may. He means may.
I'm really grateful to Robert and to Michelle and to the university and everybody here. And this is pretty wonderful for us. And, in many ways, I know completely undeserved because, I know Dermot's failings is better than anybody.
Well, let me just say this.
But
I know he believes this too. I consider myself very, very fortunate to have gone to the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Really, it was the pivotal moment in my life and his life as well, and it just means a great deal to me. I mean, I really can't ever repay that.
And me too. I would say that in a way, it gave me a happiness in life that I don't think I could have ever achieved, and I know other places look down upon the University of Alaska sometimes as well, after all,
So what?
Well, I know, but and even here, sometimes among faculty, I got tired of hearing all these people who went to New Haven. Apparently there's some college in this town called New Haven, which, I could talk about. But I always thought that both of us, we were so incredibly lucky. And even as they said in that show, you don't need a genius to teach you anything. You just need somebody to help you, and who's concerned and caring. And we've had great people at the University of Alaska, and we've had big losers. Let's face it. That's one thing I didn't like, that slogan of great people doing great things. Well, come on. Everybody knows that we had some great people doing greatly stupid things. Let's be honest here. But gosh, overall, how wonderful place this has been for so many people if you think about it in the right way. And I am eternally grateful to all the professors and students, and to my brother Dermot. He's helped me enormously, and Debbie and my children and his and our families. And I'm really lucky, and I've been really lucky to live in this. We've been really lucky to live here for so long. I'm mistaken for Dermot every day of my life. Every day. Don't you think that's true, Dermot?
Yeah.
And so we told this story. I won't say who it was, but it was a politician. We didn't have it on this thing. Politician I was sitting with at the airport. And he thought I was Dermot, and I did not tell him I wasn't, because I thought, after all, he was a politician on the
That's
school
why I
board.
heard you didn't want to disappoint him.
I did. Yeah. Well, yeah, right, exactly. I didn't want to disappoint him. Anyway, and these politicians usually are kind of neurotic, and they're shy. Anyway, and his name was, should I tell him the name?
No. Well, he ends up, let me finish the story. He ends up sitting on the airplane next to him.
Right next to him. All the way to
so
Seattle.
He had to admit he was not me.
After about a half an hour on the plane, I thought, oh man, I've got to better do it sooner or another. So I said, Mr. Burroughs, Bill Burroughs, I'm Terrence, I'm not Dermot. So that was the worst time. But many other times I've just let it go. I say hello. I say hello to everyone. Dermot doesn't say hello to my students. He usually says, well, but honestly, it's because he's at a very difficult job, and it's stressful.
I didn't know who they were. I don't understand.
They were my students. Well, anyway,
Well, I have to ask you, do people confuse your books? So
Yeah.
people say to you, that a great book on E.T. Barnett,
happened. That's happened.
and Frank Barr, man, you nailed that one.
That's happened.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
You
But
know,
do you get the royalty
but
checks?
neither are,
No.
since our books are what you call best sellers.
They're collector. These are collector's items.
They're collector's items. Now, I will say there's a right-wing blog, and I haven't looked at this, mostly commenting on our combined lack of literary ability. I was really tempted to jump in the discussion and point out, that
I'm always telling him to not jump
do
into
that.
the
Yeah,
discussion.
I can't resist sometimes. Well, I must say, Dermot has a much thicker skin than I do, and it's a tough job being a newspaper reporter, really incredibly difficult. It's sort of like most professions are difficult, I suppose. People who aren't in it, they think it's simple. The less you know about this is my mathematical equation, the less you know about something, usually the more certain you know how to do it. And you're so confident, and it's so easy, and actually nothing is easy.
Yeah, that works well with surgery.
So, yeah, right, yeah.
the
Now,
less you know,
Robert,
the better.
has this been an easy event interviewing us? Has
No.
this been...
I'm in therapy.
Decided to go back to the church.
Anyway, Robert, I want to thank you very much for. Thanks for doing
this. You're going to let him finish?
Yeah.